From childhood instability with a disabled mother to a late diagnosis of ADHD, I navigated overwhelming challenges, including losing my father and my partner while managing significant debt. Now on the path to recovery, I ponder, am I truly late to the game in life? I was raised by my mother, who was a single parent. She chose to leave my father because of his addiction to alcohol and pills. Shortly before my birth, she was granted a disability pension due to a spinal defect that made her physically disabled. Additionally, she had frequently visited the psychiatric emergency room in the 1970s, likely as a result of being placed in foster care since she was born out of wedlock. Today, I recognize that I had undiagnosed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that impeded my education, but neither the school nor the child and adolescent psychiatry noticed this. Despite having numerous interactions with the school, child psychiatry, and social services to find a sustainable way for my mother and me to live together without causing harm to each other, little changed. Today, I have encountered social workers who are astonished that I voluntarily placed myself in foster care when they learn about my childhood experiences, and they remark that circumstances would have been handled differently today. After struggling significantly in elementary school to gain admission into the high school program I desired, my world was turned upside down when I discovered that my father had been sober, and had been for a few years, and he hoped to contact me. So, just as I was about to commence high school, I unexpectedly had a father again, and we were to attempt establishing a relationship despite having hardly seen each other since I was 2 years old. Simultaneously, as I was getting to know my father, it became unsustainable for me to continue living at home with my mother, and together with social services, my transition away from home, with their assistance, was being arranged when I was 17. Soon after the decision had been reached, and I had moved in with my girlfriend and her family in a panic, my first major setback occurred. My father passed away at his home, and I was tasked with sorting through and packing up his belongings, as well as those from his workplace, while also managing my room at my mother's house and the portion of the household items she had saved for me throughout my upbringing, so that I would have something resembling a home when I moved out. My uncle took care of my father's hunting weapons and his car, but it was left to me, at the age of 17, to handle the rest, including contacting private individuals and authorities and notifying them of his passing. Not to mention the challenge of arranging a funeral without knowing my father's tastes or preferences, and whether he had any specific wishes for the ceremony. I still remember that I actually had a fever during his funeral. Fast forward a few years, and I surprised my mother. Our relationship improved immediately after I moved out by taking her to be in the audience of her favorite television show. That was when an idea formed in my mind. Television and film, that is what I want to pursue. I returned home and began researching how to enter the industry, discovering that there were some educational programs for which I could apply. However, to gain admission to these programs, I first needed to complete my high school studies. So I did, and then I applied to various programs until, after 2 to 3 years, I finally secured a spot in one. The issue with the program was that it was over 200 kilometers, approximately 125 miles from my hometown, and I prepared to move to the location alone to start my studies. However, my partner decided to join me in the move. Meanwhile, my mother's condition had gradually deteriorated, making it a relief to escape her decline. Her memory was deteriorating rapidly. The program I had been accepted into was a 2-year program, with the first year emphasizing theory and most of the second year dedicated to practical training. Before we could embark on internships, we first had to complete a short film. On the penultimate day of filming our short film, my second major setback occurred, and at that time, I did not realize it would last for a long time. During filming, one of our actors collapsed and died on the way to the hospital in an ambulance. I was responsible for sound during filming and had 4 different microphones recording, which captured the sounds the individual made before collapsing, and we hurried to administer CPR while waiting for the ambulance. By some miracle, and with creative filming, we managed to complete the shoot and focus on the upcoming internship period. The challenge was that 90% of media production occurs in the capital, so relocating to an already overcrowded city was the next step. After extensive searching, I believed I had found a place to live. However, it turned out to be a scam, and when I confronted the person and explained that I did not want numerous things ordered in my name, I was threatened with violence, continuing the aforementioned setback. I managed to move past this and arrived in the capital to begin my internships. But just when things were progressing smoothly and I was energized, setbacks struck hard. As an unpaid intern trying to enter the industry, it was customary to say yes to everything and be the one to solve every problem. Especially since I had secured an internship at the same production where I previously had taken my mother. After a few weeks, the situation, saying yes to everything while simultaneously dealing with an undiagnosed neurodevelopmental disorder, became unbearable, and the supervisors chose to terminate my internship. I became so unwell that I sought help at the psychiatric emergency room, where they determined that I was suffering from burnout due to the events that had transpired. I then chose to return to my partner to regroup and recover. However, barely a week passed before my sister called to inform me that my mother had collapsed and was taken by ambulance to the intensive care unit. Due to her medication, including blood thinners, being discontinued, she suffered multiple blood clots, which ultimately led to her death. While we were at the hospital watching over her, knowing her time was short, my partner decided that 11 years together was sufficient and expressed that she did not think she could or wanted to continue. This decision was made when we were merely a few meters from my dying mother. Once my mother passed away, it was nearly Christmas, and we hurriedly arranged a funeral to complete it before the year's end. At the same time, a process began to divide our life of 11 years together. I started searching for a new place to live, and 6 months after my mother's death, I relocated, beginning a year of rehabilitation and medical leave to recover. As I slowly began to feel ready again, I obtained a media job in the new location and started to feel that I could once again aim for the capital. So I did. I secured a long-term temporary position, and there I was informed that although it was a temporary role, it was for a function needed Monday to Friday, day in and day out, as long as the channel was broadcasting. This temporary position and this promise came 5 months before reports started coming in about people getting sick in China with symptoms similar to persistent cough and high fever. 8 months after I began the temporary role, my position was terminated in favor of the permanent employees in the company. After negotiating with authorities to receive my unemployment benefits, which seemed like half the country was doing at the same time, I found an advertisement for a position 220 kilometers, approximately 137 miles, north of the capital, and I packed my belongings and left. I took a chance, hoping it would work out this time. I arrived and managed to work through my probationary period before COVID-19 struck with a new wave of illnesses, and employers became hesitant to hire permanently, resulting in my unemployment once again, now in a much smaller location. Misfortune also began to impact my finances, necessitating my first loan. A few more months passed, and a new opportunity arose at the company I had worked for before the pandemic, but this time 490 kilometers, approximately 305 miles south. I packed my life up once again and moved south. This time, everything felt positive. I felt accomplished, and my new boss and team were pleased with me. However, then came the crucial date when my probationary period was supposed to transition to permanent employment. My boss consulted with my colleagues, who confirmed their satisfaction with my work. However, they noted that I sometimes disappeared when I completed my tasks and had difficulty interpreting social situations. This feedback became the basis for their decision to not continue my employment, and I faced the same outcome yet again. Later, it was determined that I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, inattentive type, and that the boss's decision was therefore discriminatory based on my disability. Life repeated itself, and I moved again, this time a distance of 200 kilometers, approximately 125 miles, and to facilitate that move, and to cover previous expenses, I had to take out a loan of approximately 20,000 United States dollars, or about 18,000 euros. Once settled there, I secured a job where I stayed for 2 years before realizing there was no opportunity for growth, leading me to decide to return to school, this time focusing on information technology, networks, and servers. At that point, I had just turned 36 when I resumed my studies, and I was the second oldest in the class, feeling like a fossil compared to my classmates. Fortunately, this time I had undergone and navigated a neuropsychiatric disability assessment and now have a diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, inattentive type. And I recognize that with this, I am entitled to assistance in my daily life, both in academia and professionally, as well as privately. Today, the debt has decreased to approximately 15,000 United States dollars, or around 13,500 euros, and I see a glimmer of hope on the horizon. However, I am acutely aware of the cost of reaching this point, and I know it will take time to emerge from the metaphorical tunnel. I also feel immense frustration that no one has taken the responsibility they should have. I understand very well that I cannot change the current situation, but despite this, I can't help but mourn the fact that my attention deficit hyperactivity disorder was not identified and diagnosed earlier. Who knows? Perhaps I could have completed my high school studies sooner, entered higher education earlier, and even spent a few years in the job market while remaining afloat when the metaphorical waves hit. Certainly, I would have gotten soaked at times and felt close to being overwhelmed, but I wouldn't have sunk as easily as I did at the slightest disturbance, as I did in reality. Thus, in addition to feeling deprived of everything that people typically experience in their 20s, such as traveling, working as an au pair, and partying, I have not had the opportunity to experience any of that. And now, I find myself with a partner who has accomplished everything they wish to do as a young adult, who is well established in the job market and who, shortly after we met, was able to purchase their first apartment. Meanwhile, I feel foolish, unfinished, and late to the game concerning life. Adding to this, my partner wishes to start a family soon, while I had hoped to find a job following my education and then embark on a 40-year-old's version of what I missed in my 20s. No, instead, I will likely need to start a family, and rather than spending money on vinyl records, I may need to focus on purchasing teething toys and baby bottles. Instead of planning and discussing trips, I will instead find myself comparing preschools, and once one is selected, I will need to plan for my child's enrollment. It feels as if I'm being robbed of life, and part of me feels incredibly selfish while another part views it as evolutionary, recognizing that I am in a better situation than, for example, a male praying mantis who dies shortly after reproduction if he is not involved in the process. The question remains, just how significant is the difference?